That is another part of our ritual. One thing that I have been forgetting to mention for the people that are here in person, one of the traditions that we have here, and I would invite anybody who is at home to enter into this tradition too, if you need to. We always have a candle here in the front of the sanctuary, and it is if you are having anything in your heart, whether a joy or a concern, and you just want to light a candle for it, feel free to light a candle. It becomes part of our sacred space. And if you are at home and you have a candle near you and you feel like there's something in your heart that you want to light it for us, and it will also be part of the sacred connection today. So we are slowly reintegrating all of these rituals we once had, and it feels nice to be getting back to them. So our opening words reflection this morning is from Joyce Rupp. I introduced her to you last week, and this is called Midlife Searching. I keep pulling it out, the old map of my inner path. I squint closely at it, trying to see some hidden road that maybe I've missed. But there's nothing there now except some well-traveled paths. They have seen my footsteps often, held my laughter, caught my tears. I keep going over the old map, but now the road leads nowhere. A meaningless wilderness where life is dull and futile. Toss away the old map, she says. You must be kidding, I reply. She looks at me with Sarah eyes and repeats, toss it away. It's of no use where you're going. I have to have a map, I cry. Even if it takes me nowhere, I can't be without direction. But you are without direction, she says. So why not let go? Be free. So there I am, tossing away the old map, sadly, fearfully putting it behind me. Whatever will I do? Says my security. Trust me, says my midlife soul. No map, no specific directions, no this way ahead or take a left. How will I know where to go? How will I find my way? No map. But then my midlife soul whispers, there was a time before maps, when the pilgrims traveled by the stars. It is time for the pilgrim in me to travel in the dark, to learn to read the stars that shine in my soul. I will walk deeper into the dark of my night. I will wait for the stars, trust their guidance, and let their light be enough for me.
There is always a light when we are ready to see it. There is always a light when we are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill. Together we will. There is always a light. be a kindness together we will.
There is always
There is always a light.
There is always
We are ready to see it. There is always a light.
There is always
We are ready to be it. To see the light and to be the light. To show the rising of the light and be a kindness
Our moment of gratitude this morning comes from William Ellery Channing. To live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion, to be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, not rich, to study hard, think quietly, talk gently, act frankly, to listen to the stars and birds, babes and sages, with open hearts, to bear all cheerfully, do all bravely, await occasions, hurry never, in a word, to let the spiritual, unbidden, and unconscious grow up through the common. This is to be my sympathy. And as we enter into that moment of gratitude, we remember that this community of care is created through our work and time together, our commitment to one another. This is our covenant, to walk together in loving fellowship, to share our hopes and values. As we now pass these baskets, both in person and virtually, we thank you for your generous gifts, which support the work of this religious community and Unitarian Universalism in the world at large. And now, with hearts of gratitude, we will now receive today's offering.
We love
This congregation is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to its life, we affirm our lives within it.
From you, together we share at home this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share at home this we live.
I'm going to start my sermon today with some words. And in case some of you are wondering what I'm doing here, because I said that Laurel might be sharing her Living Human document this week. She's going to share it a little bit later on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Living Human document and what that means today. So I'm going to start this with a letter written in 1920, and the following words are not necessarily going to make sense to most of us, but my invitation is to just listen to these words as they are significant because they were one of the first letters used to begin to truly understand and treat a person who was dealing with a schizophrenia episode with the new lens of understanding in the early 20th century. And so this first letter is an excerpt that this person wrote to a friend, which demonstrated that something was a little bit off. And then the second part of it is his first person account of how he ended up at Westboro Psych Hospital. And he wrote to his friend, and he was sending out a lot of letters to her like this. And he wrote, "Let me add that I have figured out the cause of all insanity. The whole of creation is organized in degrees, and each degree in thoroughbred stock is a family of 4 corresponding to the type of a family I proposed a while back. The line thus went in orderly connection, father, son, with the lines alternating. If for any reason this principle is changed, we have warfare. Like is unable to recognize like, and we have a ruthless competition. If in the Christian system of degrees, the system is changed and the key family is lost, then we have insanity." And then he later wrote, "At one time I succeeded in climbing into the sun, but through some clumsiness I managed to destroy the balance of things, and my friends and relatives in the sun suffered heavily in the consequence. I kept struggling in the effort to restore that balance and keep the floor of my room from tipping up and sending everything down to the lower regions. I was engaged in this interesting occupation when the door opened and several men appeared, among them Dr. O'Brien. They had my clothing with them, and they wanted me to put it on. It was, of course, part of a plot to undo me, so I refused and resisted. I had therefore the honor of being transported to Westboro in a straitjacket." So these excerpts were taken from the writings of a patient in a psych hospital 100 years ago. The man who 100 years later would be given credit for creating the concept of hospital chaplaincy as we know it today. This writing was a man named Anton Boysen. And it's so significant, not because it necessarily makes sense, but because he used these letters and the letter that he wrote to his friends with other letters he wrote while in the middle of a psychotic break to become one of the first pioneers in studying and understanding what was happening in the inner world of a person who was experiencing something like this. And so he used himself as his very first case study. And what he wrote later, actually, he wrote this while he was in Westboro. He was there for 2 years. He wrote, "The hardest thing is to realize that those of us who are here are practically counted as among the dead. We have no standing in the eyes of the law. We have no rights. Our words count for nothing, and our wishes, our feelings, our judgments are only so many reasons for doing otherwise. If I had to describe this place, I would say it is a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, where the light is gone and the loved ones cut away, while those in control are industriously engaged in suppressing the symptoms which might lead to recovery, all too often through the agency of the devils with pitchforks of authority in their hands. Over the door I would write, all hope abandon, ye who enter here." Perhaps this is a bit strong, and yet I feel that it is not far from the truth. This is indeed a place of lost souls, and the methods of treatment are nil. It is just a great prison, which they call a hospital. And so the concept of hospital chaplaincy was born. Anton Boysen took his 2-year commitment in the hospital not only as an opportunity to study both himself and the process by which he felt himself entering into one of the 5 psychoses he would experience in his life, but he also took it as an opportunity to create a new concept of how patients in mental hospitals should be understood and treated. Through his own lived experience, he coined the term, familiar to many hospital chaplains today, the living human document. Boysen believed, at least for himself, that his psychotic breaks with reality were inherently religious in nature rather than organic. And he believed that what triggered these episodes for him were specific points in time when his world was upended and his world paradigms had been shattered. And he realized that these life experiences were the precursors to his own breaks. He wrote, "I believe that many forms of insanity are religious rather than medical problems, and that they cannot be successfully treated until they are so recognized. The problem seems to me one of a great importance, not only because of the larger number of sufferers involved, but also because of other religious and psychological and philosophical implications which inhere in it. I am sure that if I can make it to it any contribution whatsoever, it would be worth the cost." And in fact, what was so interesting was that it was his persistence in telling the doctors that some of his episodes might serve some higher purpose, that there might be some type of value in them if he could be seen as a whole person. It was his insistence of that concept that kept him incarcerated for almost 2 years. When he finally decided to just agree with the doctors that he wasn't okay, that's when they released him. And so what he came to believe, and keep in mind, this was 100 years ago, and so much more research has been done with, the biology and the organics of it. But he believed, at least in some cases, that what was happening was there was a disorganization of the patient's world, and something had upset the foundation upon which the ordinary reasoning processes were based. And so when he was finally released, he took as a course of study all of the letters he had ever written to his family and friends and used himself as his first case study. And in chaplaincy, what we do when we're training professional chaplains, we do case studies, they're called verbatims, where we go and have a conversation with a person and we look at the whole of the conversation, and then as a group, we take it apart and say, okay, what was going on here? What was going on here? And so he started the model of this. And so what I want to focus on today is the whole concept of the living human document as as a way to talk about the universal concept that all of us at some point in our lives may enter into the wilderness, so to speak. And the idea that it's so important to understand our lives from this perspective of the whole, as opposed to just fragmented parts. And so while many of us may not have experienced an actual psychotic break in the way that Anton Boysen experienced, I'm sure that on some level, we can all relate to the concept of feeling somewhat out of sorts, out of place, or lost. And I'm sure most of us have experienced times in our lives when everything that we know and have grown comfortable with just isn't working for us anymore. And haven't we all been at that place where we just want to run away and hide for a few days or weeks or even months at a time? We check into our own personal world of darkness, even if we are performing our day-to-day routines. Things that used to be fun just aren't anymore. Things that used to be meaningful seem empty. We know that we're meant to do something more than this daily grind, but what is it and how do we find it? And in her book, Dear Heart, Come Home, which I just read from, Joyce Rupp refers to this period of darkness as the midlife journey. She says, midlife is more than a crisis. It is a summons to grow and a challenge to change. Midlife beckons one inward, where we discover our authenticity, where we realize both our limitations and our grandeur. It is here that we come home to our truest self. We take our external experiences with us to the inside and look at our life. We evaluate our goals, hopes, dreams, beliefs, behaviors, experiences, all that has marked us and contributed to the person we have become. And we ask ourselves, is this the person I want to be in the future? There are times in our lives when each of us are called to go deeper, to reevaluate who we are and what we are doing here. What is our purpose? And as we grow older and wiser, our purpose may change. Things that worked for us at one age simply no longer work for us. Thoughts, beliefs, attitudes that used to fit us like a glove now feel outdated and old. Activity that once brought joy now only brings a sense of dread and obligation. We need to reevaluate who we are and embrace our aging, embrace the changes that come with the years. Wandering in the wilderness is a very human thing to do. Moses and his people wandered the desert for 40 years. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness being tempted by the devil. The Buddha went away on his own for 7 years before he became enlightened. And in fact, in monasteries in the earlier centuries, it was very, very common for many of the priests and nuns who later became saints to go through periods where they literally had psychotic breaks and went insane for a period of time. Back then, this was considered a spiritual gift. Today, the same people oftentimes are committed to hospitals. In the book Buddha, the author writes, "He who walked apart was neither admired nor despised. It was assumed that his path must first lead into solitude." Only he who found nothing because he would not seek disappeared quietly from the community. I like that. Only he who found nothing because he would not seek disappeared quietly from the community. The one thing that all of these people had in common was that they went away, and when they came back, they returned as different people. They left as one person and returned as another. And the reasons that these stories have proven so popular over thousands of years is because these are stories about the human experience. As human beings, we can relate to a man named Jesus just needing to get away and figure things out. We can relate to the Buddha getting discouraged with life and realizing that there must be something more than what he had been led to believe for his first 20 years. We can relate to Moses wandering, knowing that he was a leader and yet not quite knowing where he was actually going. Carl Jung recognized that what works for the adult person in the first half of life will not work for the second half. Each person's journey will unfold in a way that calls her or him to growth. And sometimes we realize this truth on our own. And sometimes it takes us being thrown into darkness, kicking and screaming, to realize that it's time to move forward. Joyce Rupp says, one can deny that a volcano is erupting and just freeze in one's place and become a petrified, hardened fossil. One can die at 40 and not get buried until 90. And so we come back to the living human document, a concept which may seem simple today, but really was groundbreaking 100 years ago. The idea that ministers, doctors, social workers, teachers, really anybody working with another human being, in order to actually help or heal a person, needs to and must see the whole person. In order to make sense out of a life, the whole life needs to be read like a document, a living human document. Anton Boysen understood that we are more than just the sum of our parts. And if only one piece of us is looked at, or we focus only on the symptoms of disease, we may never get to the root cause. We have all come to the place where we are today based on the whole of our lives, our families of origin, our religious upbringing, the friends who influenced us, those defining decisions that have altered the trajectory of our lives and put us on a different path. Not one of us can be dissected or understood simply by one event in our life or from a glimpse of who we are in one moment of time, taken out of context of the rest of our years that preceded us or the understanding of our future and who we imagine ourselves are becoming. And if anything, this past year and a half has demonstrated that to us. Things can change literally overnight. The question is, are we prepared for the changes? Are we able to adapt? Do we embrace the idea of the unknown as a new adventure or something to be feared? For some of us, the changes have been foisted on us this year, are welcome and exciting, and an exciting opportunity to expand and grow and move out of our unacknowledged comfort zones. Nothing more than a step in a positive direction. For others of us, however, it might not have been quite as simple because change is scary. We weren't looking for it. We weren't asking for it. And here it is right in front of us with very little warning. And some of us are excited about this new concept of moving forward with a new normal. And for some of us, there is grief and we are still struggling to figure out what that new normal entails. And as we move into the next few years and encounter more uncertainty and change on both personal and collective levels, I think it will be helpful to remind ourselves that we indeed are, each one of us, a living human document. So who we are today is a result of who we have been in the past. And yet we are always moving forward, bringing with us the whole of who we have always been. And if we can remember to view both ourselves and the people around us as these sacred documents, I know that we are all going to be okay. And so I'll just let us sit with this for a moment. So I'm going to share one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite people named Paul Tierlink, who showed up in the sanctuary about 2 years ago and said, "Can I just play you a song?" And the song that he played me was called "No Soul Sings Alone." And I want to share that with you now. Some of you have heard this before. There's a bit of a lag because I have to share it through YouTube. So if the lag is bothering you, just close your eyes and listen to his beautiful music.
So I posted these lyrics on Facebook and people said they wanted to hear it. So here we are. No soul sings alone. There's turquoise sparkling in the summer sky, and emeralds dancing in a kitten's eyes. I know stardust lays on moon each cloudy night. A diamond in your heart is shining now, oh so bright, and no soul shines alone. No heart beats on its own. There's a spark of life within us that connects us to the whole, and a song of joy we're singing as we realize love's our real home. No soul sings alone. There are peaches warm out hanging in the sun, and cherries ripe for picking by someone. I hear hummingbird wings beat a rhythm of love. Wildflowers are singing, we are here for everyone, and no soul sings alone. No heart beats on its own. There's a spark of life within us that connects us at the soul, and a song of joy we're singing as we realize love's our real home. No soul sings alone. The rivers kiss the mountains and the meadows feed the birds, and your laughter, I am certain, is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. There's a gentle breeze blowing through your hair, and the smell of summer rain fills up kiss the mountains and the meadows feed the birds. And your laughter, I am certain, is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. And no soul sings alone.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Peg, will you
Blessed is the path you take, may look right you are.